Neither the FX2 nor the A7 IV or the A7C Mark II are full-frame cameras. They are Super 35 APS-C style cameras that happen to have a full-frame mode for video. Welcome, my name is Belal Khan, coming at you from the studio at the West, aka Al Maghrib, coming at you from Space City, aka Houston. I am absolutely excited about the announcement and release of the Sony FX2. And these are about a handful of reasons why a lot of the folks and a lot of the noise on YouTube about how this is a weird camera, I think the mindset and the thought behind it is misplaced. Just to kind of put things into context with what I'm about to share, the work that I've been doing here has been primarily on Sony cameras. We started with 1-inch sensor Sony video cameras. They were great, they were reliable, they got the job done. In terms of the image quality that they put out, you got a very good high quality 1080p image, downsampled from 4K. One of the main struggles though that we kind of came across was low light. Granted, you have a controlled light setting, but if we're trying to do things like events and areas where lighting is not necessarily in our full control, then that proved to be a limitation. In studio recordings, we could totally make it work, but in order to fill our workflow gap with relation to do events, we knew we needed more light sensitive cameras. And so we traded up to this bad boy, or several of these. So we had 3 XD cams. We traded those up into 3 of the Sony ZV-E10s. These cameras, although they were great, they also showcase limitations. Slow sensor readout speed. When you go into a changing light scenario from outside to inside, and you have set things to, say, an auto ISO, there is a major noticeable color shift that happens between the different ISOs, which many times rendered the footage useless, because it's like, why is it going from magenta to green to, like, why is the hue changing? It's like the white balance was dialed in, but turns out when the ISO changes, that also changes the hue. And so there was a lot more control needed to be had when using these cameras. So you couldn't allow for the ISO to fluctuate. And there's also the limitation with relation to dynamic range, color bit depth in terms of 8-bit. Again, in a controlled environment, totally fine. Dynamic environment approved to have its limits. And so that's when we upgraded to these FX30s. So in the studio right now, we're running with a combination of FX30s and FX3. This is an amazing camera. It's a workhorse camera. The only downside that I can see with the FX30, once you go above, say, ISO 6400, you'll notice the noise reduction within Sony cameras, which all of them kind of have baked in, causes the image to get a little bit more muddy. In most environmental settings, that's not an issue. Thing that I've noticed, a pattern that's kind of been established with the FX3 and the Sony ZV-E1, what this is kind of showcased to us is like, all right, when you're in a controlled environment setting, ISO 800, which is the base ISO, S-Log3, dial in all those appropriate settings, your white balance, and it's great. That's also the same case with the FX30. But when you go into an indoor environment with dynamic lighting, uncontrolled situation, you're going from bright indoors or bright outdoors to dim indoors. The limit is when you're at like F4, 12,800 ISO, especially when you're hand holding. One of the things that I love about Sony cameras is their internal gyro data logging that the video files have. It allows you to pull that footage into gyro flow, which is not Catalyst Browse. If you're thinking, I don't like Catalyst Browse, it's hella slow. But with GyroFlow, which is separate free software, you could pull that video file into it, and it'll have all of the data in terms of what cameras recorded on, what lens was recorded on, what all of that information that allow you to then stabilize the footage appropriately, correct for rolling shutter and things like that. Only issue is that once you crank up that shutter speed, you're going to hit that 6400 ISO real quick. And so that's where something like the FX3 or the ZV-E1 comes in handy. With relation to the FX30 again, in a dynamic situation when the ISO runs really high, the image kind of gets muddy. So when you're in that kind of environment where you don't have a lot of control, this is where the FX3 and the ZVE1 comes in real handy. But ask anybody who does any kind of event recordings, interviews, talking heads, static stuff. The issue with the FX3 and the ZVE1 or the A7S3, there's no in between. Many times when I'm shooting, I'm like, you know what? It would be nice to have like a base, maybe a third base ISO at like 4,000. This is a space in terms of operating in a semi-controlled environment that Lumix is capitalized on. It's a gap in the reliable video space. S5II, S5IIX, we've got reliable phase detect autofocus now. And so they went ahead and released these cameras. It's similar in terms of feature set and capabilities of some cameras like the A7 III and then later the A7C. But if you wanted 10-bit, you would upgrade to the A7 IV or the A7C Mark II. On the Sony side, in this space, you are lacking reliable video for long form kind of content. If you're doing short form stuff, creative stuff, all that is like those cameras will do just fine. But if you're looking for something that has appropriate thermal management, the ZVE1 will overheat on you in conditions where you have direct sunlight hitting the camera. So if you're outdoors, you're in a hot environment, this is Houston, right? It's Space City. If it's 90 or below, that's a cool day. You know what I'm saying? And so you need cameras here that are that can deal with humidity and that can deal with heat. Cameras like the ZVE10, cameras like the ZVE1, the A7 IV. I know a couple buddies who have the A7 IV. They bought it for video, but again, the challenge always is thermal management. That is going to put a damper on your ability to produce stuff, or you're going to have to work around its limitations in terms of how much you record and how long you can record for. They desperately needed something that is reliable in that video area. And the biggest complaint I've been hearing a lot of people mention is like, oh, you can't do full frame 4K 60. Now, if you want to be able to do 60 FPS, you've got the ZVE1, you've got the FX3, full frame sensor readout kind of stuff. And if the limitations with relation to your native ISOs is a big of a challenge, and maybe Sony at the wasn't the right setup for you, you would go to something like Lumix. But I've never looked at a camera like the A7C Mark II or the A7 IV as full frame cameras. First, they're photography first cameras, and photography generally tends to cater towards a full frame crowd. But whenever it came to video, traditionally video, and whether it's been broadcast, corporate style stuff, interview, static, traditionally you had B4 mount sensors, which are much smaller than 1 inch. These are your broadcast style cameras. You've had Super 35 on the large end, which is your APS-C style. So to be like, yo, I need a full frame camera, maybe you do, maybe you don't. The real advantage of something like full frame is in the area of light sensitivity, ability to gather as much image as you can at the lowest possible ISO or at the cleanest, least grainy image that you can get. And that's why you would go for a larger sensor typically. But the way around that, what I admired about Lumix, especially with the Micro Four Thirds category of cameras, when I got the GH5, immediately I felt its limitations in low light settings, and I felt like maybe I should have gotten the GH5S. And I had rented the GH5S cameras for some event projects, and I felt like they fulfilled or filled in the limitations that the GH5 had with the compromise with relation to IBIS. But if your camera's on sticks, that's a non-issue. And the quality of the image coming out of the GH5S is similar to like a full frame camera. And if you really want the full frame field of view and the depth and things like that, you can slap on a speed booster and boom, you've got it, right? Now, the key thing that's lacking is reliable autofocus, but in that era from 2015 to 2020, reliable autofocus was really non-existent, or it was just coming into play, right? With the Canon's dual pixel, and then Sony with some of their alpha line of cameras, just we're finally kind of getting into it. But where they fixed autofocus, they compromised on everything else with relation to video quality. For video, there's still a lot of things that, as a video shooter, that you needed that Panasonic provided. Until finally you started getting some of those features on both Canon and Sony cameras. But still, they didn't give you everything that you got with Panasonic. And people started migrating from Panasonic, including myself, because although on a professional side we use Sony's, for me, on my personal side, like I mentioned before, I was using Lumix cameras, GH5, GH5Ss, and for photos, I was using Canon. In terms of my first camera was an interchangeable EOS M original, which later with Magic Lantern became like this thing that I would love to shoot with. M6 Mark II was something that I shot on for several years. With the GH5 and G85, these are cameras out, again, for my personal stuff. Under the, I don't want to say guise, but under the understanding rather, of like, hey, this is my personal stuff. The economics of it are personally driven, and so therefore, it's got to be budget. And so Sony is like, all right, you might pay a premium, but it's gonna work. Whereas with these other guys, it's like you have to make it work within the scope of what I was trying to do. I hope that makes sense with relation to on that whole budget-minded concept. But going back to the point of having a camera that could give you the same image quality or close to like something in terms of full frame, whether it be in terms of the image quality, low light, and like lack of graininess, what some people would be seeking. I was always hoping, just the way that Panasonic did with the GH5S, that Canon or Sony, and I felt more with relation to Sony, that they could have done for APS-C. Little did I realize they already did. Sony always has had for video something like a GH5S. And it was the A7 IV. It was the A7C Mark II, just not in a reliable video-centric body that had proper thermal management. Neither the FX2, the A7 IV, or A7C Mark II are full-frame cameras. They are Super 35 cameras with relation to video. They're geared towards being Super 35 for video that also happen to have a slow sensor readout version of full frame. If you recognize that reality, then you recognize that the FX2 is a camera that fills a very important gap within the Sony lineup, and that it gives you two cameras in one, meaning you get a fast readout, low light sensitive APS-C camera that will outperform an FX30, for example, and it also gives you a high quality full frame mode, a dynamic camera that also has a tripod mode, which is full frame. And if you're on a tripod, right, and you're doing like events or instructional or talking head, corporate interview, those kind of things, you don't need 60 frames a second. I don't know anybody who does 60 FPS unless you're trying to record some sort of soap opera aesthetic and you're going to be delivering at 60 FPS. But outside of that, I don't really see the point about like, oh, it doesn't have 60 FPS in full frame. Unless, of course, you want to do video in 60 FPS, and then you're going to pay a premium across the board. And so I think where it sits, where it's priced at, I feel like it is in a good spot. And I can foresee myself placing an order, maybe not a pre-order, but I could, because the key thing I need to figure out, and this is my one and only complaint with relation to the FX2, why with the viewfinder? I mean, the whole point of getting a video style square-ish, rectangular-ish view rangefinder style body is because it doesn't have a viewfinder. When we're shooting video, we don't want a viewfinder. We use monitors. Most of us are not putting our eyes to the thing. I can see maybe if you're going to be taking photos, or because some people do complain about the screen on the or the Sony cameras in general, they're not the highest quality screens. Granted, right? Especially they're not that bright either in an outdoor setting compared to like Canon cameras and others. But at the end of the day, like if you're really serious about video, you're gonna have a monitor on there. But if you're so inclined to add a viewfinder, make it removable. And that's the thing that I need to find out about the specifics of the FX2. How do I remove the viewfinder, right? Now, I notice there's a bunch of screws in the pictures that I've seen. Is that something that I'll be able to do easily? Because I like the portability that comes in this form. Somebody who does video stuff in any capacity in a professional manner, I feel like the FX2 is the camera to be had. Like if you just had to have one camera, maybe the FX2 is it. Another question though is, why would you choose Sony over Lumix in this space? One, there's a whole lot of smaller lenses in the Sony lineup that I believe are more affordable than in Lumix, unless of course you're going to be adapting Canon EF glass to your Lumix. Then it just might make more sense for you to just go to Lumix if you don't already have, if you're thinking about moving into one ecosystem over the other. I know in my experience, just over the years, Sony works, right? You put a lens on, turn that thing on, you record, it does its thing. But I think the Sony FX2 is an amazing addition to the Sony lineup. Done is better than perfect. I know if I were starting a budget studio from scratch that was going to have some economics behind it, I would probably start with 2 or 3 Sony FX2s as opposed to mixing between FX30s and FX3s. So that's my take. Let me know if you have any thoughts or perspectives on the FX2 and what Sony's got coming up in the pipeline, as well as all of the other cameras in the space. Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you soon.